Hello again. I'm Rebecca Hargraves. I'm from Healthforce Center at UCSF with the California Improvement Network Program Office team. I'm really excited to introduce you all today to Lisa Countryman-Quiroz. She is hello. We asked Lisa to come and have a conversation with us today because of her unique vantage point in the workforce development space. Lisa is the CEO of Jewish Vocational Service. The way I've always known of Jewish Vocational Service is as JVS. JVS is a nonprofit dedicated to creating pathways to high quality jobs at a living wage, with a focus on jobs in healthcare, technology, and the skilled trades. If I may be so bold as to quote you, Lisa, because I did do a little research and I found this great speech that you gave last year. As Lisa describes the work that JVS does, JVS is not just about connecting people to jobs. JVS is about activating human potential. It's about smoothing out the path for people who are innately capable, deserving of, and ready for more rewarding and purposeful work. We've spent a lot of today talking about, finding, nurturing, and retaining the workforce that each of our organizations needs, which is really the heart of our ability to provide services and care to the communities that we all serve. And in 2023, as we heard from some of our panelists earlier today, the ability to do this requires innovation and flexibility and future thinking. And Lisa and her team at JVS, they know innovation, they know what workers today want, and they know how successful employers are leaning in and embracing these opportunities to create pathways and develop not only the workforce, but also the jobs that our communities need. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really looking forward to the conversation and sharing whatever I can. I hope it's helpful with all of you today.
Fabulous. So tell us, I did sort of the very high level what JVS is, but just ground us a little bit more. Tell us a bit more about JVS and some of your organization's recent work.
Yes. So before I dive into our work, I want to say just a little bit more about the belief and the vision that drives the kind of on the ground things that we do. We believe, as I'm sure all of you do, that everyone deserves a chance to build a prosperous, thriving life for themselves and their families. But this number may shock you, over a third of Californians are living at or near poverty. And an astonishing number of those people have jobs. So of the families living at or near poverty, 80% have at least one full-time working adult in the family. And we believe that is an injustice. So it's not just, as was true maybe 10 years ago, that it was hard for folks to find jobs. It's really hard for folks to find high quality jobs. And of course, the pinch that so many employers like yourselves are feeling is that there is a labor market shortage. There aren't enough skilled workers. And so how do we work together to bridge that divide? And that is really what drives our work. On top of that, there's a secondary injustice, which is of those folks who are living at or near poverty, an extremely high percentage are women, are people of color, are people without 4-year degrees. So resolving that is really at the heart of everything that we do at JVS. And it's why we're squarely focused not just on helping people find employment, but on ensuring that everything that we do, every program we design, every partnership we engage in, is anchored toward our North Star goal of economic mobility and racial equity. We have very strong evidence that what we do works. We have access to long-term employment wage data for all of our job seekers. And we know that on average, folks are earning about $40,000 a year before they come to JVS. Something happens, they lose their job, they get disconnected from the workforce. They come to JVS and they get retrained, they get re-inspired, they get reconnected to new networks. And 4 years after they graduate from JVS, they're earning about $95,000 a year on average. And by now it's closer to $100,000 a year. Wow. So we're not just helping people get back to where they work, we're helping to put them on a new track of greater possibility and greater prosperity and potential. And that's what we mean by activating human potential. To me, that's super exciting. I know that those numbers are kind of pretty far above and beyond what a lot of workforce programs achieve. And because of that, we want to make our impact even greater. And there's 3 ways we're doing that. First, we want to grow the number of programs that we offer. We want to increase our footprint so that more people have access to these great programs. But there are 2 other things that we want to do that are really about making structural change and structural impact. And so that is taking what we've learned, what we know works from designing these programs, and bringing those lessons first to employers. We want to be doing direct work with employers to help them change the way they think about hiring, sourcing, onboarding, and yes, advancing their workers. And we also want to have impact in the policy arena. So we want to help remove barriers that exist, and we want to help increase and grow the pie of workforce funding, making it more equitable and accessible, so that more people have access to truly, truly transformative programs. So that is that's like what drives what we do. That kind of gives you a sense of what our big aspirations are. We are trying to 100x our impact in the next 10 years through those 3 approaches. But really getting into kind of like the nitty gritty of what we do, Rebecca mentioned, and I've been blabbing, so you've probably forgotten it by now, but Rebecca mentioned that we do training in healthcare, in technology, and in the skilled trades. And of course, I think we all know that increasingly technology is present in all sectors. And so we definitely think about our technology training programs with that lens in mind. At a high level, we partner. First, all of our programs are driven by labor market research and information. So we are looking for career opportunities where there is access to a high wage job with the possibility of an advancement and where there's a high demand. So there are a lot of job openings. When we see those things, then we're going to design training programs for those occupations. We do that in close partnership with employers. So we know that the labor market might say one thing, but if there aren't employers at the ready to partner with us, and that partnership can take a variety of forms, but essentially what it looks like is it could include helping to partner with us as we source and assess candidates for the training program. It could entail paying for the training program, which includes work-based learning, so wages during the program, and then of course, hiring candidates afterwards. Now, for some employers, this can take different forms. They may only inform the training. They may only pay for the work-based learning. But every program that we offer includes those close employer partnerships. So, for example, we work closely with Kaiser, and we have run medical assistant training programs with Kaiser, where Kaiser funds the majority of the program, totality of the program, and then hires up to about 80% of the graduates. We do the same thing with UCSF. In other spaces where there isn't the capacity to place 18 or 20 people in one particular job title, we'll work with a host of employers. So a good example, also somewhat in the medical space, would be our dental programs, where our kind of main point of contact is the regional dental societies. So we will partner with the regional dental societies. They become sort of an access point to a host of employers, most of which are kind of small mom and pop shop dental offices. And then they will each host 1 or 2 interns who then hopefully will get hired on as dental assistants. And I could go on, but that gives you a flavor of like the what and the why and some examples.
That's fantastic. And I'm really glad you took a step back on the why, because, this group, everyone in here, to use my own words, is mission driven in some way. We're focused on improving the health and well-being of those that are not well served by the status quo, and those who are underserved, and Medi-Cal beneficiaries. And so trying, and a lot of this work is really hard. So people are here to try to, make some progress and looking for opportunities to continue to do this work. one connection I just want to draw quickly before we go to our next question is that, you mentioned that you look for career pathways that are high wage, opportunity for advancement, and high demand.
Yes.
And this morning, we talked quite a bit about the work that's going on in the organizations of people here today about very similar things. There's high demand because they need the workers. And there's this incredible energy and attention being invested into how do we make career ladders and career pathways and career lattices, and trying to sort of put all the pieces together to become employers of choice and to have the kinds of jobs that people want so that they can do this work. So I think there's a lot of great overlap here today that we can dig into a bit. So tell us a little bit about workers today, workers in 2023. What's important to them, and what should employers, every group on this call is an employer in some form. What should employers know about workers?
So I think that, we've obviously experienced just this massive disruption and shift, really a tectonic moment in history with the pandemic. And coming out of the pandemic, there are dynamics that we can see that are like clearly post-pandemic dynamics. There's also a generational shift that's happening. And so I think the things that I'm going to mention are really not necessarily driven by any one of those things, but probably by a convergence of factors. And not the least of which is also the feeling of instability that is so prevalent across the world. Workers are looking they want to have flexibility. So I think we see this playing out in the battle that is probably not so present for all of you, but is true certainly across San Francisco and other big cities, is that push between, the ease of working from home and the value and benefits of coming together and working in an office. So absolutely that's just one manifestation of that desire for flexibility, but that is absolutely present. Workers want to see more than they ever have a strong values alignment. And I think this is true both post-pandemic, but it's also has a strong generational dimension to it, that folks aren't just interested in the paycheck or the advancement potential. They also want to feel like they're working somewhere that they can feel proud of, and that they feel very values aligned with. The third thing I'll mention is transparency. It's sort of another dimension of the values piece. I think that there's a real desire for transparency around decision making, much more than I think there ever has been in the past, and also utilization of resources. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is workers want to see a culture of growth and support and care. We can't forget how many people have really significant care demands on them, whether it's children or parents or their neighbor, a whole host of other things. People have a lot of demands on their time, and that's where some of that expectation for flexibility comes from. And I think that's also, if we all want to retain top talent, taking very seriously how cared for people feel at work is super, super important. If you want to dig into any of those, I feel like maybe that was a bit abstract.
No, it's as you were saying, how cared for people. What I really appreciate about that, one, we're hearing a lot more just generally about how do you create an employee-centered work environment? How do you build the kind of culture and teams that people want to be at? But this idea about how do we care for people? How do they feel that? I think is so important because, sometimes organizations have the money to raise wages. Sometimes they don't. But this is something that is not, it's not necessarily connected to wages. Although, of course, it could be, right? But it's, because you need that to take care of your responsibilities. But I think it's this part about, there are sort of the economic strategies and there are other strategies that sort of complement and wrap around those as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is part of where the transparency piece can come into play too, right? Like as leaders, we're all making decisions all the time. If
Mm,
we make a choice to say, adjust our wage bands, either we're making increases for folks or we're doing equity adjustments, that is a choice that we make, and that's going to fall, we're going to prioritize that based on our values.
mhm,
And then that may mean we may not be able to make other choices. And
mhm,
being clear and transparent with what the choices you have prioritized. For example, it might be, we made these equity adjustments. We're not going to be investing in this other thing then because of that. And explain why that is a values-driven decision.
mhm,
And I don't mean obfuscate, like don't paint it as a values-driven decision if it isn't, but be transparent about the decisions that you're making, why you're making them, and know that it's not just increase in pay that's going to keep people around. It's
mhm,
knowing so much of it is about trust and leaderships, and we're living in a
mhm,
time where a lot of people have lost faith in institutions, whether justly or unjustly or for whatever reason.
mhm,
And I think all leaders have to think more and more about how they build cultures of trust and transparency and cultures and communities of care.
mhm. Yeah, and I can't wait to dig in a little bit more into the how of that,
Yes,
because I know
yes,
you've
yes,
got
yes.
some insights into, what are the successful employers doing, both the high cost and perhaps lower cost interventions. But before we get there, maybe we can take the flip side of the worker question. And, maybe you could speak a little to what's important to employers in
Mhm.
2023. And I just want to sort of tee up for everyone on the call. I really want you all to listen out for, like, does this align with how I'm thinking about things as an employer right now, or what may be different about your experience as an employer? So I'll turn it back to you, Lisa. Tell us a bit about what employers are wanting right now.
Yes. So I'll share what I hear and see. I am so curious if this particular subset of employers has different things, and I would love to maybe see that in the chat as well before we go to Q&A. So employers continue to be concerned about retention. I know through the last 3 years, we had all these wild ups and downs of like lots of layoffs and then lots of, folks leaving their jobs to do other things, or whatever was called the Great Resignation.
Mhm,
We are, for reasons that are largely driven by demographic shifts. And I don't just mean generational changes. I mean, declining birth rates since the late 70s, early 80s, there is a labor market shortage and there will continue to be a labor market shortage. So employers care about retention. They want to be able to keep their good employees, and most of them, even the big tech companies, are worried about their budgets. So they're in this squeeze of, oh, I don't have all the money that I can't just throw money at these problems. I want to keep these people. How do I do that? When they're hiring, they want people to be able to hit the ground running. So a lot of employers don't feel like they have the resources to invest in like some really robust onboarding, which they actually probably need to prevent the attrition that they're concerned about. We hear often about things that are, they're basically soft skills, right? If we want people with strong interpersonal skills, and they feel like they're not in a position to train for that.
mhm,
Now, JVS has developed a whole training, which we call our EQ suite,
mhm,
which started in our healthcare training programs, and we've subsequently woven them into all of our training programs because they've been so important and so impactful.
mhm,
And then they know that their workers need to be ready to change and adapt to changing technologies. There's, a continuous experience of change going on in any organization. And it feels more rapid and more kind of head spinning than
mhm,
ever
mhm.
before. I know my own staff is feeling a lot of change fatigue from like trying to centralize systems or bringing in new systems, and that sort of technology churn is constantly happening.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak a little bit more about the soft skills and your EQ suite? 'Cause I think we've heard this in some of our affinity groups here at CIN about, how to do more effective onboarding, how to help people with more lived experience, or maybe less professionalized experience succeed in the workplace, and just not really feeling like there's go-to resources around that. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on like what you're seeing with soft skills, what that means, and how you're doing some training around it?
Yes. So this actually kind of was birthed out of a program that we have been partnering with UCSF on since 2009, our Excel training program, which is it's a front office training program, medical administrative assistant. And that program is designed to serve folks who are on TANF. And so a lot of the participants in the program have their own experiences of trauma. And our soft skills training program from that program that kind of evolved into our EQ suite is in many ways rooted in an awareness and acknowledgement that folks are coming in with their own experience of trauma that may make them more reactive to, say, a patient who's coming in who's feeling really anxious and nervous. And so a lot of the EQ suite is about kind of building self-awareness, building active listening skills, doing de-escalation, and really communicating effectively from a place of self-awareness and self-understanding and kind of listening for those reactive triggers.
Great. Thank you for sharing a bit more about that. Yeah, it's there's just so many sort of, it just sort of like regardless of where you are in the workforce or what you're doing, I just feel like all these things are so practical and needful for regardless of role and background. So thank you for sharing more on that.
Cool.
Well, you've already been talking a little bit, like this EQ suite about what successful employers are doing, but maybe you could just elaborate more on what you're seeing and what are some examples of support, so as you talk a little bit about the successful employers and what they're doing, maybe we can try to pull that apart more to, what are some more specific things in there that maybe organizations who are part of CIN can think about applying.
Yes. I mean, one thing I'll say is that I think that anything that you choose to do costs money, whether it's new cash that you're applying to the situation or if you're just like redeploying resources in a different way. But I think there are a lot of different choices that you can make that don't require an additional cash investment. So, I mentioned workers are seeking flexibility for a lot of different reasons. How can you gather together to create greater flexibility for folks? Now, some of that could be more flexible hours. Some of that could be carving out release time for training so that people can actually participate in kind of deeper skill building and advancement training. I think that can be tied in with more talent mapping. So you've already been looking at like, what are those high demand occupations? How might those articulate and lattice into other roles? How can you be smart about carving out time for workers to take on that extra training during their regular hours? And I think that is something that employers are going to have to do, especially in the healthcare space, because demand is high and because there's a labor market shortage. Really thinking about like, can folks in this band take out 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week to do this training to feed into these other programs? How can we help build pathways for other folks into their roles, sort of like backfilling those roles?
Great. And you mentioned earlier that there are, so many demands on people. People have a lot of care responsibilities. There's so much that happens outside of a work environment that impacts work. And particularly, I think in this COVID endemic world that we're in, and just everything that collectively we've gone through over the last few years, mental health challenges are on the rise and showing up at work because, we're humans. And you talked about like how to create a place where people feel cared for. Are there any strategies or just, sort of beyond the values of like, we want to care for our people, but are there any tips or advice you can give around that?
Yes, I'm gonna speak from my own experience on this, and what I've done. So first of all, I think, to everything that I said about like flexibility, transparency, values alignment, making sure that people feel seen and cared for. Some of the things that I've done, I mean, this goes back to sort of the beginning of the pandemic, is and this doesn't cost anything. It costs however long of your time you want to spend doing it, I guess. But I write a weekly message to staff. I mean, it sounds so simple, but they feel like they know who I am. And that means, and they do. And that means that they, can trust decisions that I make. It doesn't mean now I'm free to make whatever decisions I want, like inside a black box, but there's a greater sense of visibility into me and my life. And so like last spring, quite unexpectedly, my dad died. And I wrote about it, not immediately, but like within 2 weeks, I wrote about it to staff. And I was like, I haven't been in the office. You haven't heard from me. Like, here's what's going on. And I told them a little bit about my dad and how he inspired me to do the work that I do now. And then 6 weeks later, I had to have surgery. And I also wrote about that again, like, with my own normal person barriers or boundaries, I should say, not everything, but, just letting them know that like, hey, I had this thing happen. Now I have this thing happen. I'm again out of the office. Like, please know that all these other folks are like picking up the slack, and it's okay to have surgery. Part of it is like modeling behavior, that sometimes in order to do your job well, you do have to step back. You have, a wound, an injury, something you have to heal, and then you come back. And to know that you have a team of folks supporting you, around you, that is the kind of work environment that I want to be in. And that's part of the work that I've done to try to create that. So I think it's about communication. I think it's a lot about, there's a big vulnerability piece in there, which also makes people feel connected and like they know who you are. And so many of us as leaders, we have to make hard decisions. We have to show up even when sometimes we don't want to or don't feel like it. It's really a powerful tool to share moments of vulnerability with your team, and in different ways with different teams, right? Like with your executive team, there's more probably, hopefully. And then across the rest of it, depending on how big your organization is, it's going to look a little bit different. But that's a really powerful piece to build connection and trust and to create. And I think trust is the foundation. Second to that, and a little bit more like transactionally, there's a lot we can all do to build awareness and clarity and understanding of our shared goals. The more team members at every level have deep insight into the sort of top level goals and how those articulate down to each person's role, that goes a long way to making your work much more efficient and effective. And once every team member understands that, the work together to resolve things like, these two team members need to be off on Tuesday mornings because they have something. It's so much easier to do that when there's clarity around your shared goals and priorities, frankly, right? Because we all have maybe we have 10 or 12 goals, but there's a prioritization there. And are you being clear with your team about what the priorities are?
Yeah.
These aren't secrets. These are just like leadership things, but
I feel like I can never hear them enough, right? It's, this piece about, trust is so essential to the work, and really thinking about how does that manifest, both in more from the heart-led way and also more from the strategic transparency. How are we setting ourselves up to make clear decisions and support workers and get our priorities across the finish line, which is what we're here to do, is have impact. Exactly. So no, I very much appreciate that. When we chatted before this, we shared a little bit about the California Improvement Network and how it's a group of, really diverse organizations from around the state who are all part of this health and care ecosystem. So we have everyone from health payers to large systems like Kaiser Permanente. We have federally qualified health centers, other types of delivery organizations, and we have social service agencies, we have housing services providers, other community-based organizations, all different sizes, right? Different budgets, all that. I'd love if you could share a bit about, and you've mentioned a couple with UCSF and Kaiser, just share a bit more about these successful or innovative workforce development programs. And, would love to hear more about those solutions for the larger employers. And then also how, you mentioned the dental, we're working where a bunch of different sort of mom and pop practices come together under an association to do a larger program, which I think holds a lot of relevance for some of our organizations that are smaller in size. So maybe you could just dig a little deeper into those programs, what they're about, how they work, so that all of our different types of organizations can get a bit more insight.
Sure, of course. So let's see, I'll start with, so I mentioned the program with UCSF, which is a medical administrative assistant training program. And that is structured, as I mentioned, it's designed to serve TANF recipients, so women on CalWORKs. We typically have about 20 to 25 people who go through a cohort, and maybe 18 to 20 of them are actually CalWORKs recipients. And then we have a host of other slots that we're kind of privately funding. So when I say privately funding, it's because we're using a combination of, and just stop me if I get into like acronym land and it's not clear, just pause me. So it's paid for through a combination of San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development. So normally I would say OEWD, but that's what that is. That's
thank you. I never would have known that. So thank you.
Okay. So that is the Workforce Investment Board in San Francisco pays for the most of the training, classroom-based training portion of the program. The San Francisco Human Service Agency, through the Jobs Now program, funds about 80% of the paid work-based learning. So that tells you sort of where some of the funding comes from, and the program is structured such that the first 2 months is made up of remotely delivered classroom-based training. So this is training in our EQ suite, it's training in medical terminology, training in how to use Epic, for example, kind of orientation to the different departments at UCSF that they might be positioned at. And then the next 4 months is paid work-based learning at UCSF. And so they go into their roles, and they might be in the oncology department or the nephrology department. They might be all different places. And they are paired with a supervisor and team. And then they can always touch back with their group, with the cohort, and with their program coordinator and instructor for support that they need, whether they're having an issue with their supervisor, whether they're having a persistent problem with Epic, whether they need more support around applying some of the tools from the EQ suite in challenging situations if they're dealing with a lot of kind of anxious and agitated patients. So that is sort of a description of that program. That is like a beautiful model where public and private dollars come together to make this possible. It has a very, very high placement rate for folks, with significant advancement that we've seen across UCSF for so many of the participants of that program. I'll follow up with you, Rebecca, after, and maybe you can share with everyone a video of a woman, Yasmin, who went through the program about 10 years ago. She's now a manager, and she supervises and supports Excel interns who are coming in today, and they in turn are really excited to know that she went through the program and she has advanced in really amazing ways. And it's not a standalone story. There are plenty of stories like that. So I'm happy to follow up with a video so you can see sort of the human side of that. And as you noted, we also we have run similarly structured, not necessarily similarly funded models with Kaiser around MA and phlebotomy. So same thing, where there's classroom-based training that's paired with paid work-based learning, and then hopefully, an immediate hire into that work site. Now, with the dental program, as you all many of you may know, there is really a significant shortage, and a lot of dental offices are really having a problem hiring dental assistants and other folks, frankly. And so given that there is such a need, what we proposed was very attractive to the dental offices and the regional dental societies that we began outreaching to about 3 years ago. And it took us a little while to figure out, like, oh, there are these regional dental societies that can be a hub and access point. Otherwise, most workforce organizations just won't partner with small shops, like in any sector, because it's so much legwork to get to the employer, as opposed to, say, you work with Kaiser, you can place 20 to 40 people a year with Kaiser. So the regional dental societies were really important partners as hubs to both like pitch the idea and to say, hey, we have expertise in this area. We've been doing this for a long time. Here's how the model roughly works. You know, we would love to design the same thing with all of you. And if you, you know, pay $5,000 into the program, you will get a trained dental assistant intern who then you're basically can vet and decide if you want to hire them or not. And so that was, you know, since there was so much need, that was a very attractive proposition to them. And for us, we were also very excited about the path of advancement that was so clear in that space, right? And, you know, once they come in as a dental assistant, you know, in not very much time, they can get additional training to become a registered dental assistant. And then beyond that, a registered dental assistant with extended functions. And so creating those pairings and that laddering works really nice. One of the things that I'll say that was a really interesting lesson learned for us, and I hope it's useful for you. When we started the dental program internally, we were like, oh, this is great. There's like a career ladder here. But we didn't talk to the first cohort about what a career ladder there was there. It was just like, hey, here's this opportunity. You know, if you're interested, we're going to train you for it. And, you know, we did our usual process of like vetting people and bringing them in. And then later we thought, oh, we'll just go back and say, are you, you know, we now want to build this advancement program. Are you interested? And there's two big lessons from this. One is we thought the other dental assistants who were already placed in the dental offices would be interested in advancement, and far fewer of them were than we expected. There was more interest from the people who had gone through our program, maybe because they had trust in the program. But in the next iteration, in the second cohort, when we opened with, there's a career path here, it was so much stickier when we came back later and said, and now if you're interested, you can become a registered dental assistant. So I think great. Setting the expectation can be useful.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks for going into that detail. I do have more questions, but I'm going to pause and I'm going to see if I'm going to open it up to our group. So if you have a question or a comment or just, you know, seeing some similarities or differences that you want to call out for Lisa, you know, you're welcome to put a comment into chat and we can call on you, or you can raise your hand. And I'm going to ask my colleagues just to help me with that. I think I can see though. So great. Alana, please, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and take it away.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for sharing all this very good information and just like perspectives. Elena Konowski. I'm with the Community Information Exchange and 211 in San Diego. I'm also a social worker, and I've been in the nonprofit and this kind of like industry for like 18 years. And I know one of the, it's not unique to our industry or, you know, space, but I know it's endemic a lot of times in our space is because people do care about the work that they do. And that is sometimes what, you know, expressed, whether it's intended to or not. I think like I've been in with peers and just in the spaces enough to hear a lot of times people talk about like essentially my caring is being used as part of but my compensation or feels exploiting in the sense that like the fact that I care is being taken advantage of for me to even be here, right? And so there's that given, and it creates this like, you know, kind of culture that it feels, I think, contributes to burnout and kind of like cynical, I think, sense of their work. And I just am curious in the work that you do of like how you see that combating, because it might not be in all organizations, but that as people move across to organizations and companies, you know, I think that ability to be renewed in spirit, but also be treated without that activity, you know, is tricky.
It's such a, thank you for that, Alana. It's such a big question. And like at first I was expecting you to go just like a straight line to the burnout topic. But I see what you're saying with the addition of like people are being exploited because they care, or there's the capacity for exploitation, or the appearance or the feeling that they're being exploited. And I see a lot of folks coming into our organization, for example, and they have a lot of work trauma from coming from another environment that has like a deep scarcity mindset and that expects people to do, you know, whatever it takes to get the job done, which, I mean, I don't know how political to get in this space, but like, that mindset is part of like exploitative capitalism, right? That you will do whatever it takes. And the fact that, you know, your nonprofit or nonprofit healthcare provider or whatever feels so kind of under the gun to just make it work is part of the problem. And so I would say the leader needs to upend that sensibility. And at the same time, you know, we are all beholden to whatever funding structures we participate in. So it's a hard one to answer if you feel really like you have no power over the funding that you're receiving. This is not a satisfying answer. I'm sorry.
I think I mean, I don't think there is an answer, right? It's sort of it's a tension and a dynamic that's real.
Yes.
And continuing to figure out the why so that we can create solutions and try to chip away at it and change it.
Yes.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Nicole next, but I did want to give a heads up to the LA group in case they wanted to ask a question. I'll come to you. I'll check in with you after we hear Nicole's question. Nicole, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for such a great discussion. It seems harder sometimes, I think, to present in this type of format versus just having a slide deck that you can speak to and, you know, have questions coming at you. Yeah. I was interested when you talked about, for example, dental assistants, and thank you for going into more detail about, you know, creating RDA programs and RDA with extended function. And you also mentioned that your previous clients, were those most likely to take advantage of subsequent programs to build their career pathway and skills. What type of support do you get from the employers so that they can move on and take advantage of the extra training that's offered to have forward movement in their careers? And then what's the life cycle with I don't know whether to call them clients or trainees with your organization over the duration of their career?
Oh, great. Okay, so the first question, I mean, again, I think the key here is release time. So ensuring that you're building in, and the dental program is a good example of this, because there is such a need in that space, and that's really statewide, and such a shortage. That's sort of part of how you're going to make it work long term. And this is about, so it's having a mindset of long-term sustainability, that if you want to be sustainable long-term as an employer, then providing some release time now and finding a way to make that work so that folks can advance. That also builds trust and stickiness with you as an employer. You know, there are ways that this could be set up even more. Ours is not formally an apprenticeship, but it is a good pathway that could be structured as an apprenticeship. And the reason I'm bringing up apprenticeship is because inherent to that model is essentially a contract between the worker and the employer. The worker comes in and they're getting paid a higher wage than the value they're delivering in their first year, maybe as an apprentice. But by the second year, they have greater skill, and now they're delivering almost more value than they're getting paid. So it's like an S-curve line through a straight line. That is a way that employers can ensure that folks stay on, is through a structured apprenticeship. That's just a tool, a tip, a trick that you could use if you wanted to. And it is also something that kind of groups of employers really need to get together around structuring in order to make that program model and that financial model viable. If anybody's interested in that, I'm happy, like offline through another conversation, to go into that and to make connections to the apprenticeship community. But just an example.
Thank you,
Right.
Lisa. I'm going to check in with Los Angeles and then we'll come to you, Eden. Los Angeles, any questions from our in-person crew?
Hi, this is Victoria from Molina Healthcare. My question is regarding outcomes and measures for success. So, Lisa, how do your organization measure the successes that you've had over the years with various training programs and collaborations? That's the first question. And then my second question is the demand, the workforce demands, and the needs are constantly shifting, and they vary in different markets and vary in different fields, geography and all of those things. So how do you keep abreast of the changes and make sure that that the training programs and collaborations are meeting some of the changing demands of either geography or different fields?
Okay, two big questions. So how do we measure success? Traditionally, we, like most workforce organizations, have measured success based on your standard WIOA measures. What is WIOA? WIOA is the federal Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. It used to be WIOA, now it's WIOA. So those measures are, how many people are you getting into your program? What percentage are completing your program? It should be at least 80%. And what percent of completers are getting placed? It should be at least 80%, which means net, you're looking for a 64% placement rate for people coming into your programs. And then any organization will have their own, number of people they want to serve or place in a year or in a program, and then also a wage target. How high are the wages that your folks are getting? So for us, in our most recent data poll, it was a little over $29 an hour on average at first placement. Now, only in the last 2.5 to 3 years have we started to build in a host of kind of additional success measures that we're tracking towards. One is the long-term wage data that I mentioned at the beginning. So, okay, we're placing people at about $29 an hour on average. That isn't very meaningful if they are only successful staying employed for like a year and then can't even get back to that same level. It's also not that meaningful if they stay at that wage level forever. We want to see advancement. And so we are excited about the fact that we're seeing people continue to advance in their earnings over time. And we watch that. The other measure that we have less of a like singular data point or single kind of number that we're watching on this, but racial equity. So we can disaggregate our data by race and occupation. And we do that for our own internal data, but also with the EDD data. So there we're trying to track and solve for any equity gaps in placement wages, in long-term earnings wages. And, we have to be selective. So like right now this year, we are working on understanding why our Black program participants have a lower completion rate. And we are working to solve for that and address it. When we look long-term, we see Black job seekers' earnings continue to increase for the first 2 years of employment and then kind of flatline. So something is happening in the industry, in the occupations, and or with the employers that is producing that outcome. And so that again speaks to why we believe it's so important for us to not only work on the front end, training folks, but also to work in close partnership with employers to engage them in actively thinking about kind of talent mapping and advancement pathways for their workers. So that was only the first question. How do you measure success? The other one was demands are constantly shifting. How do you stay informed? It's really hard item number one. You may be familiar with MZ or Burning Glass. These are maybe not, they were sort of labor market information aggregators that merged recently and renamed themselves Lightcast. And so we do access that data to try to understand where the labor market's headed. It has really incredible and powerful tools within it where you can see not just, there's a limitation in just looking at occupational titles, and there's a great benefit in looking at skills mapping, because if a job goes away, right, like there are fewer and fewer people being hired to be Salesforce administrators today than there were 10 years ago. But a lot of jobs require that as a skill as opposed to being the occupation. So that's a powerful tool, but we have to balance it with conversations with employers as well. Like, it may be that data analytics is a skill that's growing and growing and growing, but it may be less that's in demand as an occupational title. And it may be at high risk, like maybe it's growing now, but maybe it's very much at high risk for AI to kind of wipe it off the map. So I think we're in an age of things changing at an increasingly rapid rate. We need to tap into the robust tools that are out there that we may not be thinking about or aware of. There are workforce organizations that can help you tap into that. So like, I'm happy to connect with anybody. I also know some folks here are from San Diego, I believe, right? San Diego Workforce Partnership is a peer organization that does fantastic work. I know that they use that Lightcast data actively, so they could be a great partner for you in that. Ourselves as recently as last year, had launched. So I mentioned disaggregating our data by race. One of the things that we discovered in doing that was that because of the way our technology training programs were structured, they were kind of, they were less accessible to people who didn't already have a 4-year degree because of the occupations that we were targeting. And so it was our goal 3 years ago to create more tech programs that created accessibility into tech pathways. Last year, we had intended to run about 3 cohorts of IT tech support help desk training. We had lined up employers who committed to fellowship slots for those programs. And then last fall, you might have heard that there were a bunch of tech company layoffs, which then resulted in freezing funding around fellowships and internships, because like, that's not a good look after you lay off 10,000 people. And so that was things turning on a dime and impacting programs that we thought were, wisely chosen based on the labor market, based on, the kind of outcomes we wanted to achieve for our participants. So this is a risk at the moment that things are changing, but I think looking at the deep skill level is critical, and then being able to be as nimble as we can in times of disruption and change.
Thank you. I'm just going to check in with Eden. Eden, did you still have a question? I know you messaged me saying that part of it was answered.
Yeah, part of it was answered. Thank you so much. It was around measuring success. Really appreciate the presentation. And maybe just a quick question. I'm wondering how long it took to get from kind of where you were at 40K, I think it was, to get to the increase of where you want it to be. And then what was the kind of the deciding factor of what kind of the salary would be at the higher end? Was it cost of, the area where people live, or what was the measure that was used?
So part of our history is important here. So going back to coming out of the Great Recession, from 2015 to 2020, we were running a 5-year strategic plan called Vision 2020. And our goal was to get people into a wage band of $40,000 to $80,000 a year. And that was based on kind of Bay Area cost of living, that coupled with a combination of like, what's a living wage and still accessible without a 4-year degree. And so that's kind of where that target came from. Now, that might feel confusing given the fact that I mentioned $40,000 a year pre-program versus $95,000 a year 4 years after graduating. The reason I'm highlighting that is because I didn't want us to simply measure from the day people came to JVS, because for the most part, folks aren't earning anything in that moment, right? For the most part, they don't have a job, they have a very, very part-time job. And so I wanted to look back at least a year to see what is sort of like, what was their starting earning potential?
Mhm.
And then compare where folks get to against that. As we kind of grow and expand, and we do have, since the last 2 years, we now have some programming in the Inland Empire. We're launching programming with UC Davis this year through some state funding that we've been able to expand our programs with. So because of that, we are looking at setting measures of success against area median income, as opposed to, or like a percent of area median income, as opposed to, just an absolute number, because the cost of living is so different across the state.
Great. So to close us out, 'cause I feel like we could talk about all the ins and outs of workforce development and how to support and create the workforce that we need. Just a last question. I'm like in 1 minute or less, but looking ahead to the next 3 to 5 years, when thinking about workforce, what are you excited about?
Oh, what am I excited about? I feel like the messages are so negative and apocalyptic. Like there's a lot of fear around AI. There's, so much strife across the globe, and the climate crisis is very real and present. I think what I'm excited about is the fact, and why I remain very hopeful about the future. I feel like we're at a moment in human history where, and it's especially true and acute in America and in California, where we have to make a decision between the personal or the individual and community-centered solutions. And from a generational perspective, I see, and I'm just gonna like call out Gen Z in a big, like monolithic, kind of stereotyping, but I do see a much more community-centered mindset and a focus on long-term sustainability and kind of shared well-being. And that makes me feel incredibly hopeful. And we are at a decision point, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible note to end on. Lots for us all to think about. Lisa, thank you so much. We will follow up with the resource that you mentioned, and we'll get that out to everyone. But please join me in thanking Lisa with our emojis, what we can do in the virtual world. But thank you so much.
Thank you.